The wedding ring caught the lamplight as it rolled across the worn wooden counter, coming to rest against a loaf of day-old bread. Sarah's fingers trembled as she pulled her hand back. The pale band of skin where gold had lived for 3 years now, naked and raw in the dim light of Morrison's general store. "That's all I got left," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the autumn wind rattling the windows. "It's real gold, worth more than bread, I reckon." Tom Morrison studied the thin woman across from him, taking in the hollow of her cheeks, the way her dress hung loose where it once fit snug. Her eyes held that particular shade of desperation he'd seen too often since the drought hit, the look of someone choosing between dignity and hunger was winning. Behind her, through the frost-etched window, the skeletal remains of what had been the Whitmore farm stretched into the grey November afternoon. 3 months since the bank took it. 3 months since her husband rode off to find work in Denver and never came back. The whole town knew Sarah Whitmore was down to her last dollar, maybe her last hope. Morrison's weathered hands moved slow and deliberate as he reached for the ring, feeling its weight. 18 carat, if he had to guess, could fetch $20 easy in Colorado Springs. The bread was worth maybe 30 cents. "Mrs. Whitmore, please." The word came out cracked, desperate. "My boy ain't eaten proper in 2 days. I can make that bread last us near a week if I'm careful." Morrison glanced toward the back room where he kept his family's winter stores, sacks of flour, strips of jerky, preserves his wife had put up before the fever took her. Enough to last the cold months, enough to share. But sharing was a luxury most folks couldn't afford anymore, not with winter coming hard and early. The bell above the door chimed, and both of them froze. Heavy bootfalls crossed the threshold, spurs jangling with each measured step. Morrison's eyes flicked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the grey afternoon light, hat pulled low, face hidden in shadow. "Stores open," Morrison called out, his voice steady despite the tension that had suddenly filled the small space. The stranger didn't answer, just stood there motionless, as if waiting for something to unfold. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, and Morrison noticed her knuckles had gone white where she gripped the edge of his counter. The stranger stepped forward into the lamplight, and Morrison's gut clenched. Jake Coulter, the new foreman at the Rocking T Ranch. Word around town was that Coulter had ridden with some rough men down in Texas, the kind who settled disputes with lead instead of law. His eyes swept the scene, taking in Sarah's trembling form, the ring glinting on the counter, the desperation hanging thick as smoke in the air. "Evening, Morrison." Coulter's voice carried the lazy drawl of a man who'd never had to beg for anything. "Ma'am." He touched his hat brim toward Sarah, but his gaze lingered on her with an interest that made Morrison's skin crawl. Sarah pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders and took a half step back from the counter. The ring lay exposed between them like an accusation. Morrison's hand moved instinctively to cover the gold band. "Just conducting some business here, Coulter. What can I do for you?" "Oh, don't mind me." Coulter leaned against a barrel of flour, settling in like he planned to stay. "Just needed some tobacco. Take your time with whatever transaction you got going." The way he said transactions made it sound dirty, shameful. Morrison felt the weight of choice pressing down on him like a boulder. He could take the ring, give Sarah the bread, and let her walk out with what little dignity she had left. But doing business under Coulter's watching eyes felt like putting Sarah's desperation on display for the whole territory to gossip about. Or he could refuse the trade, send her away empty-handed, and live with the knowledge that pride had cost a woman and her boy their next meal. "Mrs. Whitmore," Morrison said carefully, sliding the ring back across the counter toward her. "This here's worth considerably more than what you're asking for." Sarah's eyes went wide with something between hope and terror. "I don't understand. What I'm saying is, maybe we can work out different terms. You keep the ring. I'll put the bread on account." Coulter chuckled low and mean. "Awful generous of you, Morrison. Course, everybody knows Mrs. Whitmore ain't exactly good for credit these days." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her face flushed red, then drained white. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the building's corners. Through the window, Morrison could see riders approaching in the distance, 3 men on horseback, moving with purpose toward town. Coulter straightened, following Morrison's gaze. "Well now," he murmured, "looks like the evening just got more interesting. Those riders look familiar to you, Mrs. Whitmore." Coulter's voice carried a note of satisfaction that made Morrison's blood run cold. Sarah's face had gone ashen. She clutched the ring so tight her knuckles cracked. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you do." Coulter pushed off from the flour barrel, his spurs singing across the floorboards. "That's Sheriff Hawkins in the lead, and unless I'm mistaken, that's Deputy Mills riding alongside him. Question is, what brings law enforcement all the way out here on a cold November evening?" Through the window, Morrison watched the 3 horsemen dismount, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Sheriff Hawkins was a fair man, but his face wore the grim expression of someone carrying bad news. The third rider Morrison didn't recognize, a gaunt man in a duster coat, who moved like a predator. The bell chimed again as the door swung open. Sheriff Hawkins stepped inside, snow dusting his shoulders, his eyes immediately finding Sarah. "Mrs. Whitmore, been looking for you, Sheriff." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "I ain't done nothing wrong." "No ma'am, I don't expect you have." Hawkins removed his hat, held it against his chest. "But I'm afraid I got word about your husband." The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison felt like he was watching a woman drown in slow motion. "Thomas's," Sarah couldn't finish the sentence. "Dead ma'am, shot 3 weeks ago in a card game gone bad in Denver. Man who killed him claimed self-defense, and the local law agreed. But this here's Deputy Marshal Crawford from Denver." Hawkins nodded toward the gaunt man. "He's been tracking some missing money from a bank job. Seems your husband was connected to it." Crawford spoke for the first time, his voice like gravel. "Mrs. Whitmore, your husband was carrying $200 when he died. Money that belonged to the First National Bank of Colorado Springs. Now either he was involved in the robbery, or someone paid him to hide something. Either way, I need to search your property." Sarah swayed on her feet. Morrison started forward to steady her, but Coulter was already there, his hand on her elbow in what looked like support, but felt like possession. "Course," Coulter said smoothly. "Mrs. Whitmore don't own no property anymore. Bank took it all. But I reckon she's been staying at the old Wilson place up the ridge. Ain't that right, Sarah?" Crawford's eyes narrowed. "That where you've been hiding, ma'am?" Morrison saw the trap closing around Sarah like a steel-jawed snare. Whatever choice she made now would seal her fate. Morrison stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and Crawford. "Now hold on just a minute." His voice carried an authority that surprised even him. "This woman just learned her husband's dead. Show some Christian decency." Crawford's hand moved instinctively toward his gun. "Don't interfere with federal business, shopkeeper." "Ain't interfering, just saying a widow deserves a moment to grieve." Morrison turned to Sarah, whose eyes were swimming with unshed tears. "Mrs. Whitmore, why don't you sit a spell? I'll put some coffee on." He guided her to the old rocking chair by the pot-bellied stove, the one his late wife used to favor on cold evenings. As Sarah sank into it, Morrison caught her trembling hand, the one still clutching the wedding ring. "Keep that," he whispered, pressing something into her palm alongside the gold band. She looked down to find a small cloth pouch, heavy with coins. "Elizabeth would have wanted you to have it. She always said a woman needs something of her own, especially when the world turns against her." Sarah's tears finally spilled over. "Mr. Morrison, I can't." "You can and you will." He knelt beside the chair, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "That's $40, enough to get you and your boy somewhere safe. Start fresh where nobody knows your name. But more than that." He paused, glancing toward the lawman. "There's a letter in there from my Elizabeth. Last thing she wrote before the fever took her. It's addressed to any woman who might need to know she ain't alone in this world." Sheriff Hawkins cleared his throat. "Morrison, we appreciate the kindness, but we still got business to conduct." Morrison stood slowly, his joints protesting. Course you do, Sheriff. But seems to me, if Thomas Whitmore was mixed up in something bad, his widow deserves to know the truth before you go tearing through what little she's got left. Coulter laughed, but there was no humor in it. Truth is, Morrison, some folks just attract trouble, and trouble has a way of spreading to those who get too close. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Outside, full darkness had fallen, and the wind howled with the promise of an early blizzard. Sarah looked up at Morrison with something between gratitude and terror, clutching the pouch like a lifeline. Crawford shifted impatiently. We're burning daylight, Sheriff. Time to ride up to that cabin. But Morrison wasn't done. He walked back to his counter, retrieved the loaf of bread Sarah had tried to buy, and wrapped it carefully in brown paper. When he placed it in her lap, their eyes met, and he saw something kindle there, not just hope, but determination. The question was whether it would be enough to keep her alive through what was coming. Morrison watched Sarah slip the pouch inside her coat, her movements careful and deliberate. Then she did something that surprised everyone in the room. She stood up, squared her shoulders, and looked Marshal Crawford straight in the eye. You want to search for something that ain't there, Marshal. You go right ahead, but I'll tell you true. Thomas never brought no stolen money home. Man could barely scrape together coin for coffee, let alone hide bank robbery money. Her voice grew stronger with each word. Whatever he got mixed up in Denver, he kept it from me. Maybe he was protecting me. Maybe he was protecting himself. Don't matter now. Crawford studied her face, searching for deception. You swear to that? On my husband's grave and my boy's life. Sheriff Hawkins shifted uncomfortably. Marshal, maybe we should know. Crawford held up a hand. I believe her. He turned to Coulter, whose smug expression had faltered. But somebody in this territory knows something about that money, and I got a feeling it ain't the widow. Coulter's hand dropped toward his gun, but Morrison was already moving. The shotgun came up from behind the counter smooth as silk, both barrels aimed center mass. Easy there, Jake. No need for anybody to do anything stupid. The standoff lasted 3 heartbeats, then Coulter slowly raised his hands, his face twisted with rage. This ain't over, Morrison. Yes, it is. Sheriff Hawkins stepped forward, his own weapon drawn. Jake Coulter, you're under arrest for suspicion of bank robbery and conspiracy. Seems the marshal here has been tracking some interesting connections between you and certain parties in Denver. As Hawkins cuffed Coulter, Crawford tipped his hat to Sarah. Ma'am, I'm sorry for your loss, and for the trouble. After the lawman led Coulter away, Morrison and Sarah stood alone in the warm circle of lamplight. She pressed the wedding ring into his palm. Take it. Trade it for what I owe you. Morrison closed her fingers around the gold band. Keep it, but not on your finger, in your heart. Some things are worth more than their weight in gold. Years later, when Sarah ran the successful boarding house in Santa Fe, when her son had grown tall and strong, she would remember the night a stranger's kindness changed everything. But mostly, she remembered the way Tom Morrison had looked at her, not like a woman fallen on hard times, but like a human being worth saving. The empty rocking chair by the stove swayed gently in the lamplight, as if Elizabeth Morrison was still keeping watch over broken souls who needed mending.